Myers-Briggs test is bullshit.
That's hurtful.
It's useful to know what your traits are. It can help you figure out how you should orient your life.
Personality is a mind-bendingly complex thing.
Who are you? Really?
Every individual is the exception to the rule. One can never give a description of type that would apply to more than one individual, despite the fact that in some way it aptly characterizes thousands of others. Nevertheless, an understanding of the psychological types opens the way to a better understanding of human psychology. Welcome back to the Personality Growth Channel. Despite some bad press, I've found that the MBTI or Myers-Briggs Type Indicator test is of immense value because it provides a framework and language for describing my own mind, but also the minds of others. The real genius is not the 4-letter code of personality, it's actually the 8 cognitive functions first described by Carl Jung in this book. Today, we're going to use this free personality test, which is only 3 questions long, to sort of reverse engineer Carl Jung's 8 cognitive functions, which are embedded in only 3 questions. Now, the word cognitive function is not so much to do with behavior, it's a way of using our minds. Different processes will come together to give you one of the 16 archetypes of personality, which have been popularized in these images. It's important to understand what Carl Jung meant by the word archetype. These 16 images are almost pure forms of personality, recurring motifs that we might find in art and in cinema. They're not meant to be inflexible categories. They're not meant to box us in. The insight of Jung is meant to be used as a framework to help us understand ourselves as unique individuals. But not just our minds, also the minds of others. This channel is all about personality growth. If you like what we're doing here, please consider helping me game the YouTube algorithm by liking this video, leaving an interesting comment below, or subscribing for more personality growth content. A quick word of warning. You're going to want to follow along with me because if you watch the video first and then go back and do the test later, you risk my explanations influencing your results. Let's get into it. First, fill in your name, press next at the bottom right of the screen. Cognitive functions assessment. The goal of this assessment is to put language to your thought processes, so be careful not to select an answer based on what you think you should be. If you're older than 30, you might want to read the next section, otherwise let's continue. Which of the following do you identify with most strongly? Take some time now to pause the video and select from one of the first 4 options. When you come back, I'll explain what each of the options are representing when it comes to cognitive functions. Now that you've selected your responses, let's unpack the psychology behind each question. You see, our ancestors have had language for millennia to describe a division between our hearts and our minds, our feeling and our thinking. Jung recognized that these are judging functions. We use both thoughts and feelings in order to make decisions in the world around us. You might have guessed that this option shows a preference for feeling, while this option shows a preference for thinking. But Jung recognized another division in the way we use our minds. This time, not in making decisions or judging, but in perceiving the world around us. Now, we might gain insight via our 5 senses, but we can also generate insight without needing any sensory input. Even when we've got our eyes closed and our ears shut, our brains can intuitively come up with new information, what Carl Jung describes as the cognitive function intuition. You might have guessed that this option shows a preference for intuition, while this option shows a preference for sensing. Now, all people, all personalities use all the cognitive functions. For me, as an ENTJ, I'm kind of picking between the thinking cognitive function and the intuitive cognitive function. Now, I had a really strong reaction for both of those, but I did find thinking describe me best. This is going to be a very tricky question because you're going to relate to 2, maybe even 3 of those descriptions, but hopefully there's one that you clearly didn't relate to. Pick the opposite of that. If you didn't relate to the description of sensing, choose the other perceiving function, intuition, and that's likely to be your dominant function. If you didn't relate to the description of the thinking cognitive function, choose the other judging function, feeling. So far, the quizzes show me that I have a preference for the thinking cognitive function. The next question will provide some more clarity on my personality. And I'll do the same for you. So pause the video now and let's answer the second question of our personality quiz. The next question determines the attitude or the disposition of your dominant function. Is it extroverted or is it introverted? But it was Jung who first invented this idea and defined these terms. It's not a transfer of information, but a transfer of value. So a cognitive function with an introverted attitude goes like this. It goes from the objective world to the subjective individual, like this. An introverted attitude, object to subject. Jung describes an extroverted attitude of a cognitive function as the very opposite of this. It goes from the subject to the object. It's a transfer of value from the individual out to someone, something, or some idea. It's an extroverted direction, and it looks like this. I also love how Jung elaborates on this concept of extroversion and introversion. He describes the introverted attitude as reflective, even protective. It's fearful of the unknown and seeks to master it, while the extroverted attitude finds the unknown alluring. It's quick, it's adaptable, but it's imprecise. In extreme cases, it possesses a blindness for one's individuality. So for me, my dominant cognitive function is a judging function. It's thinking of the extroverted attitude. So TE for short. So now that you've chosen between the extroverted attitude and the introverted attitude, it's time to read a description of your dominant cognitive function. Now, of course, it's going to be different for you, but extroverted thinking reads like this. I am highly driven. I'm all about what is most effective and excellent. I love when things run smoothly and people do what they're supposed to. I appreciate it when people get to the point instead of going off on rabbit trails. I can be opinionated, but I'm willing to listen if someone confidently states their case in an intelligent way. I wish people could do that more often. I think maybe I'd run into less conflict in life, but I can really relate to that. If you can't relate to it, you might have chosen a judging function that resonated with you, but actually your dominant function is a perceiving function. So go back to that first question and try a different response until the description that you read here really does fit your personality. Because we have a dominant cognitive function, we also have a weaker cognitive function. You see, our strengths often come at the expense of weaknesses. Weaknesses that Jung describes we suppress or repress into our subconscious. Whatever your dominant cognitive function is, your weakest function will be the direct opposite of that. Strong thinkers can make weak feelers. Those with a preference for the sensory might lack an intuitive depth. As you grow older, you'll actually start to have issues not so much with your dominant functions, but with your weaker functions, your repressed functions. This conflict that you'll experience will start to grow and mature them. I think an understanding of Jungian psychology can help you diagnose your struggles. You'll grow and mature faster with a clear and sharper focus. Now there's more insight to be gained from the test, so let's lock in our answers for the second question and move on to the final question. Now, the final question in the test determines our secondary or auxiliary cognitive functions that are connected to our dominant cognitive function. You know, it's kind of curious. The judging dominants take action first and then gather the information. And the perceiving types gather lots of information, but they don't always use it. So for me, since my dominant function is a judging function, I'm choosing between sensing and intuition, the two perceiving functions. The first description describes introverted sensing. I am very systematic in my thinking and my mind is organized like a filing cabinet. I can be pretty black and white about how things should be done. That doesn't describe me. Someone who has extroverted thinking, like me, but then has introverted sensing as their secondary cognitive function, is described as the TESI personality type, also known as the ESTJ personality type. This one really describes me well. I am an abstract thinker and I have a high value for innovation. I trust my intuition quite a bit. Now that really relates to me. So we've figured out my personality type. We've determined that I'm a T-NE personality type, extroverted thinking and introverted intuition. From our first and second functions, we can also determine our third and fourth functions. Our third function is not our strength, but it's still pretty healthy. For me, it's the opposite of introverted intuition. That's extroverted sensing. And I can actually grow my introverted intuition by exploring and developing my extroverted sensing cognitive function. The opposite of extroverted thinking, though, is introverted feeling. And that's almost the bane of my existence. As an ENTJ, the quickest path to growth is to develop that weaker cognitive function. And it's true for you too. What are your cognitive functions? I think having an understanding of our cognitive functions can really help us grow. There's a lot more to discuss, so make sure you like this video, leave an interesting comment below, and subscribe for future personality content. For now, since you've completed the test, you can read a description of your personality type and the cognitive functions that make it up.